Today we're joined by Shahed Khan, who is a co-founder of Loom and served as president of the company for nearly 5 years, now serving as an advisor. Also today, he invests in the future as co-founder of both Hyper and Prologue. Hey, Shahed.
Hey, everyone. How's it going?
So breaking down the basics, what is Loom and what was the growth in users from day one versus today?
It's actually the easiest way to communicate via video asynchronously. So if you have something you want to share, whether it's on your screen, you can easily narrate on top of it, record the video, whether it's 30 seconds long or an hour long. It all uploads instantly, and you get a shareable link that you can send to anyone. And we have north of 13 million users using it globally, from companies like Spotify, Product Hunt, and so forth.
That's all crazy. Super excited to get into a few questions about the journey, so let's do it. So I stalked your Twitter for this, and I am super picky about tweet threads. I often troll the concept, but you put out really, really, really thoughtful ones. And one of them really caught my eye, specific tweet within it, and I quote, "At Loom, we took 8 months to raise $600K. This was partly due to investors not fully understanding the pitch we were making about async communication in a remote distributed world, but also due to a pretty mellow fundraising climate." So 600K is awesome, but far less than what you had been anticipating for this endeavor. What did you eventually learn that your pitches lacked? And in a situation that ended up feeling very scarce, what did you learn were blessings in disguise?
For those that don't know, we actually, were fundraising in early 2016 when the fundraising climate had kind of calmed down. And that was just a result of the market, right? That had nothing to do with Loom, which was actually called Open Test at the time. But on our end, what we were able to control was who we were meeting. We lived in San Mateo at the time, and it was pretty easy to get to San Francisco or Sand Hill Road for these meetings. And what we learned was the initial version of the product, which was a user testing product. It helped anyone collect user tests and feedback from their customers, their users, in a video format, so you can kind of see how the original idea of Loom kind of came to be. There's always video in the history of the company, but a lot of investors weren't really understanding what user testing was and how important it was in the product building process. So I believe we pitched north of 70 investors, whether it's great relationships that I've had with angel investors, venture investors, or intros that we got from friends of mine. Out of the 70, I think we've maybe had 2 people who said yes, a bunch of people who said no, or they don't understand, or just kind of didn't even bother responding. And I think the biggest lesson learned there was the initial version of the product. While we hadn't found product market fit at the time, we're still fundraising because we needed capital to survive and kind of keep the lights on. And at that time, our burn rate was maybe a couple $1,000s a month. And I think most of that just came from the rent of the apartment that we were living in and working out of. As we discovered that, there wasn't really product market fit, a few months into the 8-month process, we pivoted twice. And then our second pivot, we landed on Loom, which if you go on Product Hunt, it was called OpenVid at the time, since rebranded to Loom, obviously. And when we launched on Product Hunt, within the first 24 hours, we actually had about 3,000 people download our Chrome extension and sign up for an account. And that was in June of 2016. And I would say by September to about November 2016, we had built enough anticipation, and people started using OpenVid enough to make its way to investors, and that's when we started to close a lot of the 600K.
Wait, this is fascinating because what was the sentiment towards remote work in 2016? Because I think about my friends who run a nonprofit, and they were telling me stories about, I think around 2018, 2019, the nonprofit today runs, strictly on Zoom calls of kids across the world connecting and building together. But when this was pitched to, I think advisors or whatever, back in 2018, 2019, people thought they were crazy. They're like, how is this going to work? Fast forward not even maybe a year, maybe even 6 months later, they look like geniuses. The world completely 180 to fully embrace remote work. Not for the best of reasons, obviously, but damn, like, looked like geniuses now. What was the sentiment back in 2016, and what was not clicking for people?
Yeah, it's. I'm glad you asked because it didn't really exist back then. So even the investors that had kind of backed Loom at that juncture were really just taking a bet on my co-founders and I, and and the idea that we would figure out what it is that we were building. Um, but for us, prior to starting Loom, I worked at Weebly, and at Weebly, which later got acquired by Square, we had a work from home policy for 1 to 2 days out of the week. And formerly, I was a designer, so at Weebly, I was designing, so it was pretty easy for me to work from home. And commuting from San Mateo to San Francisco was about an hour and 10 minutes door to door. For me hopping on the bike to getting on the train to getting to the office. So like saving that time, daily about 2 to 2.5 hours, giving me time back to like spend more time designing at home. It kind of made sense to me early on that this version of remote work was here to stay. And it was just a little early in 2016. I think the only companies that were truly remote or had this remote policy kind of embedded in their culture were Envision and I believe GitLab. And it was very early. Investors didn't really understand, work from home. They saw it as a benefit and not like the default way of work that it is now. So for those that had believed in it and had taken a bet on us, that they made a lot of money.
As you mentioned in the first question, the power of Product Hunt had a strong presence in Loom's first 3,000 users. But what has the variety and growth hacks been like since 2016?
I get this question a lot, and I think oftentimes people are afraid of copying, what has worked for other companies in the past, or trying new things. And I would say, for Loom early on, what we did was we realized that the company that we were probably closely embodied from a user like journey perspective was Dropbox. And early on, Dropbox, many years ago, had launched a referral program where if you had referred a friend to Dropbox, they would get free storage and you would get free storage.
Oh,
And it was so obvious that, like kind of rewarding the referrer, the person who referred the other person with some incentive and the new user coming in just kind of made sense. So early on, I would say maybe a few months after we had launched on Product Hunt, we rolled out this referral program where, and there's been a lot of case studies done on this specifically for Loom. But the first three referrals, if I referred you to Loom and we worked together at a startup, I would unlock a feature inside of Loom, such as like I would get, if I was limited to accessing 20 of my most recent videos, now I have access to unlimited videos. If I was limited to recording 2-minute videos, now I have access to recording unlimited lengths of videos. So we did the three initial referrals, unlocked a feature inside the product. And then from referral 4 to referral 15, we gave users this arbitrary, $5 of Loom credits. And because the product was free early on, there wasn't anything really that our users were able to redeem with those $5, but it created this incentive and us kind of like, hit this psychological, trait inside of people's brains. For every, like the fourth referral onwards, you'd get these $5 in credits that were then, redeemed later on when we had a paid product. But that kind of got us from, a few thousand users to about 50 or 60,000 users. And then, we then incentivize people who, incentivize just instead of inviting your family members or like, your cousins to Loom. It was then like, making it much more focused to inviting your coworkers and people that you normally work with.
I would love to hear about your team's most notable product iterations. These always fascinate me, like what feedback you took and what you just let ride. What were the iterations triggered by? What ended up being tested? And would love to hear the good and bad of how things ended up.
I mean, I think there have been maybe hundreds of dozens of kind of growth iterations in the the 7 year history that the company has been around. But I think the most notable ones are the ones that were probably either very very obvious or not obvious at all. It's like there's like no middle ground. The very obvious ones, which it's funny because we were actually talking about this before we started this interview, was we realized the psychology that goes into someone's head when they see themselves in a mirror, but then when they open up their phone, they see themselves flipped, and that creates this you know little disguise of a person that they're not used to. So there's obviously an uptick in the number of successful recordings and recordings that got views where people did not re-record that initial video when we had flipped their camera. So what they saw was the person that they see in a mirror. So that was just like a nice psychological growth hack. A couple other iterations or call it growth iterations were when we had raised money from Slack as part of one of our earlier rounds, and as part of that financing, we had partnered with them where Loom was one of the only other video players aside from YouTube and Vimeo that was natively embedded inside of Slack. So if a Loom link is pasted in Slack, it would embed the entire video player so you could watch that video right then and there and not have to jump to Loom. So I think there are a lot of those iterations that I think were either very obvious or the not so obvious ones that also, had a big lasting impact on retention or new user growth.
Competition seems to be fiercer than ever when it comes to obtaining and retaining talent. Especially in tech, it's near impossible for startups to win on a basis of just compensation alone. So what were some of your secrets, the good, the bad, and the ugly, when it came to compelling great people?
I think the first one is just building a culture that people, are like, I think a great culture is like a magnet, and I think talent is the other magnet. And once that talent sees how incredible your culture is, either through hearing about it from your employees, from their friends who work at your company, that is probably the probably the easiest way to recruit people. So we encouraged through various incentives, like talent knows talent. So our talented team knows a bunch of talented, engineers, designers, product people, recruiters, support reps. So we really tapped into that. And other ways that we tapped into, hiring great people was building a great product. And a lot of people who were using Loom, saw how easy it was to basically record a message and send it to someone who's sleeping in Australia while they're up in New York and working, and that kind of removed the the need to have a 30-minute meeting on the calendar. Yep. So when you kind of get that aha moment and you think about like how this product can scale, you then want to put yourself in that position where you're working with that team and building something incredible. So I think those two things were really powerful in bringing on incredibly talented people to Loom.
Thank you so much for your insight, Shahed. Where can people find you across socials?
I'm on Twitter, and that's probably where I spend most of my time. I respond to tweets. I try to create, very compelling Twitter threads. Sometimes they take me weeks to, come up with, but I'm mostly active on Twitter.
Awesome. Yes, everyone check out his Twitter so you can get more of this insight. Thanks, Shahed.